Excellent. All right. We anticipate we will probably welcome just a couple more as we move along, but that's all right. To honor your time, we'll go ahead and get started with this afternoon's webinar. We hope you are finding yourself in the right space. Today's focus is on the Part B application for innovation pathways. So that's what we will be focusing on together this afternoon. Just a couple of housekeeping notes for you. We do have live transcription available if that's supportive to your participation today. You should see that in the top left-hand corner of your Zoom screen. And by clicking that down arrow, you'll see an option to pull up a separate browser tab, which has that live transcription available to you. We are also recording today's webinar experience so that it's available to you for future reference in whatever way that might be helpful for you, as well as others who perhaps had a conflict and aren't able to be with us live today. I'm very pleased to be joined by a fantastic team this afternoon. To start, my name is Laura Toda. I am one of the Center for Collaborative Education colleagues who partner in this work. With me today, I'd first like to introduce, or for many of you, reintroduce Jennifer Watkin, the Innovation Pathways Lead from DESE. I also have with me colleagues from the Center for Collaborative Education, including Callie Cornell. Dawn Shearer-Corin is with us this afternoon, as well as my colleague, Allison Flez. I do want to put a special flag for Allison that if you have any technical needs today, Allison is our resident guru and is happy to respond to any questions or challenges you're facing if you just contact her through the chat box this afternoon. I'll pause for a brief moment to give the mic to Jennifer. Jennifer, do you have any colleagues who happen to join us this afternoon that you want to introduce for us?
I don't think that any of my colleagues from DESE have been able to join us for this, but certainly if anyone joins, I will give a shout out and introduce them. Thanks for that, Laura.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay. So just a bit about the Center for Collaborative Education for those of you who are perhaps newer to these innovation pathway spaces. CCE partners with education communities to reduce systemic racism and transform schools to ensure all students succeed. That's the broad overview of the work that we do. But we are very pleased to be here today because we partner with DESE to provide technical assistance for the Massachusetts Innovation Pathways work. That includes numerous virtual events, virtual for the time being only, hopefully. That include things like webinars, which is today's experience, as well as workshops, office hours, and a virtual professional learning community, which gives members of Innovation Pathways the opportunity to collaborate and do some consulting work together as peers. We have 3 goals for our time together this afternoon. The first 2 really center around making sure you all leave with a really robust understanding of the Part B application. And to that end, sharing with you supportive tools, resources, and even opportunities to discuss the Part B application process with one another. So to have an opportunity to learn from peers in the pathways work that are in the same place as you are right now. And finally, a goal we have consistent for every experience we offer is just to help build connections across the Innovation Pathways Designee Network. As we know with all forms of learning, when we learn together, we're better for it. And so we always make sure we build as many opportunities as possible for that collaborative experience within this network. In order to achieve our goals, this is the agenda that we are going to pursue this afternoon. In just a little while, you're going to hear from my colleague, Callie, who's going to provide a robust innovation pathways process and tools overview for you and give you some time to explore a particular tool that we know is helpful for folks in this process. We're then going to transition to either breakouts or some full group discussion based on what best suits the needs of the folks that are in the room today, as well as our schedule. And then we'll wrap up sharing with you some future opportunities that might be helpful as you continue to work on your Part B applications. We've been at this virtual space for a long time now, it sure seems, but it's always a helpful reminder, I think, especially in these afternoon sessions. We acknowledge that some of you might be still in school settings, some of you might be working from home settings, We have a little graphic here to remind us all that sometimes what we see on the screen is not what you are experiencing in your setting. So please tend to your needs as we go. We want to be adaptive and responsive to whatever helps you participate. So if you need a brief break or you got to pause your video for a moment, we understand and we extend that grace as everybody joins us in these virtual spaces. So with all of that being said, and having had the opportunity to share who I am and who my colleagues are in this space, we want to know who you all are who are joining us today. And so we would love for you to share with us in the chat box your name, your school or district, so where you're coming from. And then we also invite you to respond to the connection question on our next slide here, which is, what is an inspiring moment you've had in your innovation pathways planning process this fall? So if we could bump our slide forward just one, it will share with you that question in case you need that visual reminder. So go ahead and take a moment or two to share that information with us in the chat. And while you're doing so, I'll put another plug now that we've had a few more participants join. Also a great opportunity if you need to go ahead and rename yourself on Zoom for whichever preferred name you would like to be called by during this webinar today, because we will, as I noted, have a couple of opportunities to interact with one another. So we'll invite you to do those things simultaneously. So I'm seeing responses coming in the chat box. I'll invite any of my colleagues who want to maybe help me here if we want to give a little shout out for anything we're seeing in terms of inspiring moments with Pathways work this fall so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing a couple people say that Part A notifications, successful Part A notifications. And so absolutely very exciting. And while you're here, so excited for that. A few folks talking about sort of a vision for students and sort of hearing students talk about their pathways, collaborating with colleagues and discussing with colleagues about the particular needs of their student population. Let's see, they're coming in so fast.
They are. And we might have to just keep up with them as we transition to the next part of our agenda. But know that we are reading them as quickly as possible. For me, I know it's going to mean scrolling back up and moving a little slowly back through. But we're really appreciative to each of you being here today. And we'd like to invite this connections activity as the kickoff of keeping our chat box really alive today. So we are going to be moving through a lot of content and a few different experiences for you today. And we are going to have our eyes, on this chat box. So please feel free to use it widely for any questions that are surfacing for you along the way. You can shout out particular colleagues of mine if that's helpful. If you have questions specifically for Jennifer from DESE, you can just @ Jennifer so she knows that you're calling attention to something she might be able to support you with. But we'll do our best to monitor the chat. We might respond in the chat box, but we'll also have some verbal opportunities today to tend to things that are surfacing in that chat box. And with that said, one final welcome to all of you joining us this afternoon, and I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Kelly.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Laura, and welcome everyone. So excited to see many familiar names, but a few new ones too. So thanks for being here, and we're excited to welcome you into the Innovation Pathways community of practice. And so for just sort of stage setting, for about the next 10 to 12 minutes or so, we'll be sort of sharing quite a bit of information around Innovation Pathways guiding principles, the core characteristics, and some elements of the application. We'll also talk about some tools that might be helpful to you, but we'll have time. So let's say we'll do some sort of like rapid fire sharing, but then we'll have some time to digest some of that information, those tools, and have conversations with one another. And then we'll wrap up our time today, as Laura said, with spending a bit of time around open Q&A. And so that can be sort of technical pieces about the application, things you're wondering about, sort of anything's on the table for that section. So please continue, as Laura said, to put questions in the chat. We'll either sort of like attend to them if they're clarifying questions, but sort of hold them for maybe the Q&A at the end if they require a bit more dialogue and discussion. So with that, so as we outlined, we wanted to share and then give you a chance to really become familiar with the tools and resources to support you as you continue to design and plan for your pathway programs. And so our first slide here, this should look very familiar to many of you, or to all of you. So these are guiding principles for innovation pathways. And these 5 guiding principles are key to innovation pathways program design. And so in order to receive designation, applicants are required to demonstrate that their programming is rooted in all 5 of these guiding principles. And those principles are listed here on the screen: equitable access, guided academic pathways, enhanced supports, connections to career, and effective partnerships. And many of the tools, and the reason we sort of share this at the front, even though you have some level of familiarity with them, is that many of the tools and resources that we share today, along with a whole lot of other tools in the Innovation Pathway Toolkit, are organized by these guiding principles. Excuse me. And so, though these particular guiding principles are familiar to you, what we haven't spent a whole lot of time on, or a detailed amount of time as a network in some of our technical assistance events prior to this point, is talking through the core characteristics of innovation pathways. So these characteristics are also required in order to receive designation, and they help fulfill those guiding principles. And so Massachusetts recognizes that the 6 core characteristics, when they're integrated into a coherent set of strategies and services for students, work to ensure that there's high quality pathway programming in place. And so to share a bit more about each of these guiding principles of each of these core characteristics of advising, labor market demand, integrated instruction, work-based learning, credential preparation, and post-secondary linkages, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to sort of share a little bit more about each of them. So she'll talk about sort of the specific requirements that are part of the application process and part of a successful programming, and also sort of a few other maybe like tips and tricks and notes about each one of them. So Jennifer.
Thanks, Kelly. I guess no pressure here, but I wanted to reiterate, as Kelly had said, that these integrate into the 5 guiding principles. So please don't think of these as 6 other things to remember as you sort of muddle through the 5 guiding principles. They're aligned, and the history of these is actually from the work that enabled us to launch Innovation Pathways back in 2016. DESE got a grant from JP Morgan Chase through the New Skills for Youth program, and these are the six core characteristics that came out of that work. So I'll speak to each. I also have a squiggly dog in my lap, so my apologies for sort of wiggling around myself. So on the advising front, all of you who are pursuing designation this year have either already gone through the MyCap training or are doing it now. So each student does need to have an individual plan. MyCap was formerly known as Individualized Learning Plans. That plan needs to be managed online using an electronic platform. Many of you use Naviance. MIFA Pathways is another one, and it's free. There's MassCIS. Career Cruising, I think that's now known as Zello. But we want you to be able to speak to how you're using that particular platform and help students be self-directed. Career development education is something that is critical for innovation pathways. It's an aspect of advising. Oops, if we could go back maybe one slide, sorry. And that includes, there's a whole spectrum here. So it's from career awareness, which is sort of on the lighter touch end, through exploration and ultimately immersion activities. But that should be built in the advising process. And so we would expect that all of what I've just discussed here is built into this plan along with their post-secondary planning. The goal of Innovation Pathways is to give students sort of that sense to devise the plan, have an informed plan, and to know what activities they're going to pursue beyond high school, be it college, additional training. So all that needs to be baked in. We'll probably go to the next slide. So labor market demand. Each of you have identified a pathway or maybe pathways that you're pursuing through the designation process. And we actually identified or pre-selected 5 pathways because they are in demand here in the Commonwealth. They're high skills and they're pathways that are applicable in any area of the Commonwealth. So we've sort of already done the labor market justification there, but it is related to employer demand and the career opportunities that await students in that industry upon completion of the pathway or any additional training. So again, the eligible industry sectors, this designation cycle: manufacturing, information, environmental and life sciences, healthcare and social assistance, and business and finance. We might investigate adding additional sectors in the future, knowing that some things have shifted, certainly in the COVID context, but these are the 5 that we have allowed for the last few years. integrated instruction. What does this mean? So pathways are designed to be coherent structures that have rigorous instructional courses that are relevant to the pathway. They include academic and technical subjects. Your scope and sequences, I think we had asked for you to speak to that in the part A. We would need to see at least 2 technical courses, and by technically mean that they need to be aligned to the industry sector, and 2 advanced courses. For innovation pathways, they can include dual enrollment, advanced placement, or other college level courses. Many of you are using Project Lead the Way. I don't think that we have anyone in the fold who's an international baccalaureate school, but that would also be acceptable. You can actually go on the DESE website, and I can probably find that link and put it in the chat to look at the list of advanced courses for accountability purposes. Those are the courses that we're talking about here. Work-based learning, I think of this as the hallmark of innovation pathways. All students who are in innovation pathways program should complete either a 100-hour internship or a capstone that's aligned with their industry sector of choice. Here's some of the quality elements. You would need to have a staff liaison. Students would have ongoing reflection opportunities. You'd use a Massachusetts work-based learning plan. And then the student would need to have an end of experience product, an oral presentation, a written report, a video. Some of you are doing showcases, which I think is really cool. And I know that we would probably enjoy being invited to one of those and attending at some point if you wouldn't mind extending that invitation. But yeah, happy to speak further about work-based learning if you have questions, but that is really the key component of innovation pathways, in my opinion. So credential preparation and post-secondary linkages. While students are not required to earn industry recognized credentials or IRCs, as we often refer to them while they're in the pathway, many of you are choosing to do that because the sectors lend themselves to that. But something that's important here is that I wanted to stress is that innovation pathways should also prepare students to make progress towards a certificate, associate's, or baccalaureate degree. So it's sort of a both and thing here. Students should know about their credentials that are relevant to their industry sector. Sometimes they might pursue them while they're, sorry, I'm putting a dog down on the floor. They might pursue them while they're in high school, or at least know what's next and sort of how to get there. And that ties back to their MyCap, their individual learning plan. So again, along their pathway experience, they're participating in a wide range of activities from college awareness and engagement activities, and they're going to be getting those explicit linkages to their to post-secondary to inform their post-secondary planning. So students are really going to emerge with a good sense of what their interests are, hopefully, and what it takes to get to what they want to do in their life beyond high school.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate you sharing those details. And we'd love to take a moment to pause in our sort of delivering of lots of content and have you think about sort of as you're planning around these characteristics. We'd love to know sort of which ones you're finding most challenging at the moment as you plan for the Part B application. And it's by no means binding, as sort of just a sort of touch point, temperature check to see sort of where you all are. And as you continue to do your planning, sort of like that might shift over time. But as of right now, sort of which core characteristic has posed sort of the most challenges or sort of brought up the most questions for your planning team. So I'm going to launch a poll here. You should see that pop up on your screen, and we'll give you a moment to sort of reflect on that question and then answer that in the poll here. We've got a couple folks with fast fingers here, like adding in their responses. It's looking like I'll end the poll and then share the results after we've given folks a minute to respond. But as of right now, it's looking like the work-based learning and credential preparation seem to be the areas that are feeling the most challenging at this moment in time. We'll give people another moment to respond.
I would certainly say that that's understandable, certainly for folks who have not offered work-based learning probably in the past.
All right, I'm going to give 10 more seconds. We still have a couple people that are giving responses, so we'll do 10 more seconds and then we'll end the poll and give a chance for you to take a look at how that sort of like shook out in terms of percentages of folks that are here. So you should be able to see the poll results here. And as we see about almost half, 44% of you are saying work-based learning, as Jennifer said, that for, understandable for where you are and in the process. And that seems like right on target from what we've heard from applicants in the past. And then the second piece around credential preparation seems to feel challenging to folks. I think rightly so, as Jennifer said, like understandable, these are new systems, new structures, new ways of thinking and doing school. And so these are the pieces that often feel like the most challenging or sort of bring up the most questions in terms of both adaptive and technical questions as we move through. And so while today we won't be sharing any specific resources to those pieces, I do want to highlight the toolkit, the Innovation Pathways Toolkit, which we'll talk about in just a moment, has a whole section around work-based learning and some supports to help you think through some of those challenges, offer some models, examples of partnerships or other places that you might just sort of draw some inspiration from around work-based learning. And then we'll also, we have the nice part about being fully virtual is that all of our events have been recorded. And so last year, about this time, was in the fall of 2020, we did a webinar on work-based learning, particularly in the context of COVID and sort of some virtual opportunities for work-based learning. And so that can be found in our archive. So on the Innovation Pathways Technical Assistant website, which that tiny URL link is on the screen at the moment. That's where we have archived all of our webinars. And so if you scroll to the webinar section, take a look there. You can look through the resources, look through the webinar content. You can see the recording, the transcript, and the slide deck that was there. And thanks to my colleague for putting that link in the chat. And so that's always there and available to help support you. And so sort of like almost like we planned it, just letting you know that the Innovation Pathways Toolkit is always there as a resource for you. And so it includes processes, tools, materials, examples related to essential components of pathway program design. And so these processes, tools, and resources within the toolkit are certainly not exhaustive. There's a whole lot of information out there. And it's not intended either that you as a design and development team at your school sort of make use of every single resource, but rather we share these resources and we share the toolkit and we continue to add to the toolkit over time so that it's intended to support a variety of design, development, and implementation needs, and in a way that's customizable to your school, your district, and your particular pathways context. And so you can sort of pull those tools to help support your thinking, your designing, your planning along the way. And that can be accessed from the Innovation Pathways Technical Assistance website, which is at the link there that my colleague Allison shared just a moment ago. We want to spend just a moment sort of sharing sort of the overview of the toolkit. So if you've not had a chance to go in and take a look at the toolkit and how it's organized, we have it organized by 4 parts. And so at this stage in your design, you're probably your design of your pathway programs, you're probably taking a look at a lot of section 2 and 3. It's probably the most helpful to you at this moment in time. And section 2 includes resources that are authored and released by DESE to support planning and design of the pathway elements. And that particular section is organized by the core characteristics that Jennifer just spoke to a moment ago. And these include resources like the Massachusetts Labor Market Blueprints, Model Internship Guide, MyCap tools and resources are all within that piece there. And under section 3 of the toolkit, there's a recommended 4-part design process with accompanying tools under each part of the design. And so on the next slide, we'll sort of quickly talk through that process of the 4-part design process. If we could head to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So this here is our 4-part design process, which is recommended, sort of not required, but something that might help and guide your thinking through sort of your design and development of pathway programs. And so although these phases and steps are numbered, they're rarely approached in simple chronological order. Oftentimes we find that steps are occurring simultaneously. Sometimes you have to go back and retrace a certain step in order for the pathway to be successful. But we sort of offer these phases and steps as in this order to serve as sort of a logical reference point for teams that are engaging in pathway design and development. And so there are resources and tools under each step to help think through the components of those steps. And in particular, we want to highlight the designing and planning phase, so which is where we sort of imagine you all might be at the moment. And so here your teams are still brainstorming, you're mapping and assessing your existing college and career readiness policies, programs, and practices. You've sort of already identified some growing market needs in the community. You're prioritizing industries and occupations and partners that you'll focus on in your pathway. And so here we're recommending that your planning teams take some time to sort of deeply understand the kinds of knowledge, skills, and competencies that students should know and be able to demonstrate for the specific industry sector in which your pathway will concentrate. And so there are tools within that phase to help support that thinking and that planning. There are two particular resources that we want to highlight for you and that we'll spend some time sort of talking through today. And so that first tool is the criteria planning tool. And this particular tool was developed about 1.5 years ago at this point as a planning tool to help support you all as you're preparing for the Part B application specifically. And so it's arranged by the guiding principles, and it lists each individual indicator that applicants are responsible for addressing as part of the Part B application. So essentially, this can act as your checklist document to ensure that you have talked through and met all of the components of the application that you'll need for successful application and submission. And so we recommend using this with your team in your planning meetings. And essentially, because like check the box, right? Like we've done this indicator, we have a plan here, we've sort of like already written this piece up, and we sort of like don't have to worry about this piece yet and can focus and prioritize in some other areas. And so under each guiding principle, there's a table there that lists each individual indicator that's necessary for you to address as part of the application, your program, and then subsequently the Part B application. And there's a place to sort of track those indicators as not started, in progress, complete, and a place to take some notes there. And in a moment, we sort of mentioned we'll give you some time to explore tools. We're going to give you a few moments to sort of individually review this tool and take a look through. Worth noting that similar tool exists for Part A. And so we heard feedback from some of you that you use this planning tool during the Part A submission. So if you're familiar with that and you use the Part A criteria planning tool, this is the complementary resource specific to Part B. And so that's sort of one resource we'll take a few minutes to look through in a moment. The second resource we want to draw your attention to is the Innovation Pathways Self-Assessment Tool. And so again, we've got a screenshot of that on the screen here. And then rather being a checklist like the previous tool, this tool was created to specifically allow your planning teams to self-evaluate where you are in your program design. And so this can be helpful sort of whether you're at the beginning, still in your planning stages and you're still working on design and development of your pathway, or as a way to assess as you're implementing and are a few years down the road in your process. And so we've heard from school teams that they use this self-assessment or self-evaluation tool on an annual basis or every 6 months to just check in on where they are. So this tool is also organized by the 5 guiding principles, and under each guiding principle, the tool asks you to sort of self-assess where you are, whether you're sort of like initiating this practice, whether it's emerging or developing, and then if it's an established or sustained practice within your school or district. It provides short descriptions of each to sort of use as a benchmark for your assessment, and also a place for you to sort of provide a list of evidence for your rating. So if there are particular challenges or evidence you're using or data you're collecting, just sort of note that there. And as I stated, it can be used as a baseline sort of self-evaluation to determine maybe readiness for applying, but also periodic assessment to keep track of your progress and improvement over time. And it's certainly not meant in any way to be an evaluative tool, but really a reflection tool for you and your pathways planning teams. So we wanted to make sure to highlight those two for you because we thought they'd be particularly important given where you are in the process. But next, we want to spend some time going through and giving you a chance to review this Part B application tool. And so if one of my colleagues could drop that direct link in the chat, that would be helpful. So you can open up that tool and you'll get a few minutes to review. So I'm taking a little bit of time here. It looks like we might have like 5 to 6 minutes to do some individual review of this tool, and you won't be able to get through the whole thing in the few minutes that we have, but we'd like to give you a few moments to reflect and sort of as you're reviewing the tool and reading through, reflect on the work at your school or in your district and how it has what's been involved over the last year or longer as you've done your planning, and consider sort of which sections feel like they're all set, good to go, we've got a really solid plan, which sections might need some additional work, and what questions this planning tool might raise for you. And so on the next slide, we have those questions outlined so that, oh, sorry, one more slide. We've got those questions outlined. So I'm going to put on a timer for 5 minutes. We invite you to open up that document, take a look. You can turn off your camera, make sure your mic is on mute, and just take a few moments to individually review this tool and sort of with your own sort of school's application and your own pathway planning in mind, sort of which sections, which components feel like really good, really solid, which ones feel like they need some additional work, and what questions are coming up for you. So I'll stop talking. We'll put on a 5-minute timer, and we'll see you in a few minutes. We'll give you about 1 more minute for review, and then we'll come back together as a group. That was my timer going off. So we'll ask you to finish up that sentence you're reading or any notes that you're jotting down, and then come back together if you like to put your screen back on and potentially your mic on. In the name of transparent facilitation, I'll sort of name here that we had intended to put you into some breakout spaces for about 10 minutes to have some conversation around what was coming up for you, what questions were coming up, sort of what places you were feeling stuck or challenged by. But we're running a bit behind, and we don't want to send you off into breakout spaces and feel like you actually don't have enough time to talk to one another. So in light of that, I think we'll move to just a whole group discussion, sort of a few folks to share sort of what came up for them. And so, Don, if we could stay here on this slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura to sort of bring us through a full group discussion on these items.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Callie. So we just gave you a chance to look at that planning tool and asked you what sections do you feel like you're all set in? Where do you need additional work? What questions are surfacing for you? So we'd really like to give some time for people to just share in this whole group space. I should note that this webinar sort of reiterate that this is meant to be a learning space. So we hope you're coming with questions, and we hope you're coming with areas of the planning tool that you could use support. So this is an absolutely non-judgmental space that we want to hear where you feel like you're really situated well and what things you're struggling with. So if we jump forward again, we're going to focus on these 2 discussion prompts where we're asking what criteria are you feeling solid with, and what stands out to you as needing attention, and therefore what might your next steps be. So go ahead, and we invite you to unmute yourself and sort of join verbally into this space with us. If you're more comfortable as an initial entry point to share something in the chat, we of course welcome you to do that too, but we'd love to hear from just a couple of you. If you want to start with what feels solid, so you feel like you've got good ground you're coming in on, we welcome that. But we're going to turn the mic over to you, and feel free to just unmute yourself, or if you prefer to raise your hand and we can flag you that way, that works as well. So what are you feeling solid with, and what area are you noting that maybe a particular criteria needs some attention?
I can share.
Yeah, go for it, Jen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Lillis. I work at the Burke High School in Boston, and I am excited about how things are moving in terms of our curriculum planning. I think we have an awesome team of science teachers working on it, and are also kind of going in a similar direction as some of the other schools in the district. So that feels nice that we'll have some collaborators. I feel like more sort of tentative about understanding the partnerships, and even like when I go to approach a conversation with partners, kind of knowing what I want to ask for. I feel like that still feels a little bit hazy for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jen. And I should know, I'll invite my colleagues along the way. If you want to respond to anything, feel free to jump over me and do that. We will have Q&A after this for technical questions people have with really direct responses as well. So, but I want to make sure that that floor is open for my colleagues if you want to respond to anything.
Thanks, Laura. I just wanted to put a plug in, Jen. So I think this is like, I think a lot of people probably feel similarly and are in the same space there. And I would offer that we actually just had a webinar on Monday around building and sustaining employer partnerships. And so we had colleagues from Worcester sort of share their journey and sort of some of the tips and the tricks. We had a panel of both employers and students sort of speak to what that experience was like. But then our two colleagues, Drew and Kelsey from Worcester, sort of shared their process and sort of some of the things that they have gone through to develop and sustain those partnerships over time. And see that Jenny put in the chat that you saw that, so great. But for those who didn't, that's definitely a resource for you. And the slides and the recording are now up on the TA website to check back in on.
Thanks so much for that, Callie. And I see it looks like our friend Misha, maybe threw your hand up if you wanted to contribute here.
Thanks, Laura. So I'm Misha Vegan from Northampton High, and we're applying for a health sciences and social assistance grant. And I think for me, the area that feels like a lot of work right now is the MOUs, and just getting to sit down with those partners and really articulate in detail, like what are those performance measure goals, and you know, just like little, just tasky things that I feel like right now with everybody being so stressed in the world, it's becoming a little harder. I think we're all like excited for the grant. It's just the minutia. So I guess any help or strategies for how folks have done that in the past in order to move that to the next stage of this grant, even though everything's not going to be articulated.
Yeah, thanks, Misha, for that. In our toolkit, we have examples of MOUs. They've got redacted information, but some examples. So when we send our follow-up email, which will either be later today or tomorrow, I'll make sure to include a direct link to those redacted MOUs. So you can take a look. I think we have maybe 3 or 4 of different examples from different schools to take a look at. And so we'll be happy to share those directly, those links, so that you can see them as models or examples.
Yeah, thanks, Callie. I see, Tara, you shared something in the chat. I'm wondering if you're willing to maybe speak verbally with us a little bit more context about what you're thinking here.
Well, I just wasn't sure. We don't have anything that has been formally completed. So is that something that we should create and implement quickly? So we're applying right now, obviously.
Jennifer, is that something, or Callie maybe?
Yeah, I was actually going to point Jennifer and wonder if you could speak to this piece around the data needs or sort of needs assessment ahead of time.
Yeah, so I don't know if you, in terms of your thinking for the pathway, it's, what data have you used to sort of identify the pathways of choice? Have you spoken with students? I don't know if there's demand there as well. Employer, obviously expressions of interest from employers.
Yeah, mostly we've been working with Mass Hire through the critical needs sectors. That's kind of how we started.
No, that's great.
Yeah, so, and we picked also sectors that we felt like we had opportunities like within the community to capitalize on. So it's sort of a combination, and then we don't have any type of pathway in existence. So, that's kind of the only need, as far as we have no formal data stating that,
No, I think you're on the right track with what you're saying there in terms of how you're formulating your need for these pathways.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, and go ahead, Callie.
Oh, we might have been thinking the same thing here, but I was wondering if there's anyone else on the call who's sort of done that work. And Laura, this might have been where you were going with your question, but if you could share what your process was like, or some of the tools that you may have used, or how you sort of gathered that sort of needs assessment piece, either if it wasn't a sort of like formal needs assessment, but sort of like how you sort of gathered information around the needs of the district, the needs of the community, needs of students.
Actually, thinking about Victoria Kelly, I know that she has quite a battery of data. I don't know if Victoria, you would be willing to share. No pressure. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
oh no, that's fine.
your fountain of knowledge.
Yeah, I was just actually thinking about it as she was speaking. I know that at the very beginning, when we were trying to look at, what is, like, how do you grasp the student demand? And let's say we're looking at healthcare, we took, we use school brains, but the school system, and just kind of went through and looked at how many students were enrolled in like anatomy and physiology, and similar courses that would align with your pathways. And we kind of started there, and then we went to the middle schools and kind of shared out information and worked with the guidance counselors in the middle schools as well. But the preliminary work was just kind of taking a look at, all right, where are we seeing growth as far as electives in the school to kind of gauge student interest at the high school. I don't know, does that help answer it a little bit?
I see Tara shaking her head, and yeah, that was great. Thanks for sharing that, Victoria. I really appreciate that. And I also want to just say that we have the next, I would say 10 minutes or so to just talk a Q&A. And so even if you don't have a direct response or not quite ready to share responses to the prompt around the criteria planning tool, if there are questions in your mind about the Part B application, whether they're technical questions, process questions, reminders of due dates, we've got a few tips and tricks we'll share as the last few minutes here before we wrap up, but the next 10 minutes or so really around open Q&A for you. So I say that as an invitation to fire away on those questions, either take yourself off mute and ask, or you can put them in the chat.
I guess one other thing I was thinking of, Jennifer, too, as we were listening to the other participants, is with regards to the work-based learning, and getting businesses on board. On our first CTE programs that we developed, instead of inviting individual people, we worked with Mass Hire and various connections, our Chamber of Commerce, and we created what we called our roundtable discussion, and invited people and businesses and Mass Hire and the Chamber of Commerce to come to a roundtable discussion to talk about, well, let's say it was healthcare or technology for our first two programs. And everybody just kind of came to the table, and you started the conversations like, what are you seeing for need for employees in the community, letting each organization just kind of share out what their challenges were. And we used that as the beginning of our conversation, and then just kind of shared out, hey, listen, we're looking at creating a pathway in this area, and where you as organizations have valued input on what the needs are. And the organizations just kind of bought into it that way, and then they would start asking questions, well, how could we participate? And not everybody joins the advisory board right off the bat or signs an MOU, but they'll start gradually signing up to do guest speaker spots or various things. But we tried a roundtable discussion, and we're going to try it again with this round. I know Kevin's on the meeting here today, so we're going to try it with our next batch.
Victoria. So I know that getting out into the community is something that a lot of people have found to be critically important, but why not bring them to you and have a round table? And while Innovation Pathways programs aren't required to have advisory boards, a lot do. And Victoria, I know that you guys have one for your healthcare program. It's a great way to tap people to keep your program fresh and relevant.
Yeah, and it's going to be a virtual roundtable this time.
So no coffee.
No coffee this time. If you get people in person, you have to have snacks.
That's true.
That's
saving a lot of money on that these days.
Yeah, I see Madeline just asked a question in the chat, though I think just answered it. So do they have to have, Innovation Pathways have to have advisory committees? And they, as Jennifer said, do not in the way that's required for Chapter 74 programs. But many do, just by nature of how they want to inform and keep connected to industry partners for their pathway program design. So thanks, Victoria, for sharing that example.
And thanks, Madeline, for making sure that we clarified that.
I'm wondering other questions from folks. What are you wondering about as you're?
I have a question received to me directly, and it was asking about funding associated with this stage of the process to support the development of pathways. So there is an implementation funding opportunity that will come upon award of designation. So it's contingent upon obviously receipt of the designation, but those funding awards would be made in July. And there's a separate process for it. We don't try to make it onerous. Not that we want for this process to be onerous, but I think you'd find that the implementation grant is pretty straightforward. But that, you'd hear about that at the time of designation. You need to get the funds in July of 2022. And they're good through June 30th, 2023. And the last couple of years, the awards have been like in the 30 grand range.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Meg.
I think really helpful for people to hear. And I'm looking, I'm not seeing anything coming through the chat. I'm gonna give a last call for anyone to turn off their mic and ask a question before we move into our final few slides.
Like Laura said, don't be shy.
So Madeline's a question, do you need to submit syllabi and course descriptions for mass core courses as well as the technical and advanced courses?
Oh, no, Madeline, thank you for asking. You don't need those syllabi, just for the technical and advanced courses. Thank you. That would be very onerous.
So Jennifer's, oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to try to type it, but I was going to be too slow. A quick follow-up to that, because we were thinking that potentially for the advanced courses that we're thinking about doing AP biology for one, but then having a dual enrollment course that is more open to students' potential interests. So for that, would we want to collect a range of syllabi or just list a range of courses?
It would be great if you could submit the syllabi for the the range of courses that you are thinking about. Okay. Did I answer your question?
Yes, I guess the only thing I was thinking is that like for example, the options.
Right, options, yeah.
There's a huge amount of options that students have in Boston Public Schools for like dual enrollment now. And so if we were offering them, like they could take like the whole course catalog from RCC.
Yeah, so or would you be curating though as to have essentially what we want is a really coherent scope and sequence for the students? So I definitely understand that there are options for students, but I think that they would need to be refined a bit and sort of tailored to the pathway, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think we had thought like, okay, we're going heavy into the sciences, maybe some students will really want to go even deeper into that, but maybe some students might think like, I'm interested in the legal aspects of biotech, or, that we would be.
Interruption.
Oh, we're getting
All
announcements.
students must be accompanied by an adult if you're staying in the building.
Sorry about that, everybody.
No worries.
Okay, Jen.
That time of day.
What I would offer, Jen, is that we've seen some schools sort of as Jennifer noticed, sort of curate down a list. And so even though sort of like the whole course catalog might be offered to them, what they have is sort of like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 recommendations. So after students have done the biology course that you referenced, like then what are their options beyond that? And so, to your point, there might be some that are interested in the legal piece, or might some that in biomedical. So if there's a few different courses that you would sort of advise students to move into, having the syllabi for those particular courses would be helpful as part of the application. Of course, we realize that that might change and expand over time based on the students and the interests and partnerships you have. But given your current thinking, sort of what are those sort of most likely dual enrollment courses that students would be taking, or that you would sort of be advising students to think about taking?
That makes sense. Thank you. So having it, having some options, but not necessarily having it be so broad.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us on. I think Laura's got a couple more slides for us to run through some tips and tricks on the application, and a couple of notes around dates. And so I'm going to turn it over to Laura to go through the slides and take us home.
Thank you, Callie. So we want to start with a reminder of a few important dates. So February 10th is your sort of magic date. You want to put a big circle on the calendar. That's when the Part B applications are going to be due. Interviews will be held in February and March. So more information will be coming in the next weeks to month or so for information on that. And then designations will be conferred in April. So that's when you'll be hearing about those Part B applications. One of my colleagues just shared in the chat for you a link you can access for a reminder of those specific dates. Next, we wanted to just remind you of a couple of tips that have been helpful for folks in the past. And I'm actually wondering, maybe one of my colleagues can archive these in the chat box for people who might want to save them as well before the recording is available. But focus on completing the narrative entirely. That's an important aspect. Don't forget to include your exhibits and be sure to provide labels for them. You know, get your materials together, go through that organization process. We want to see the narrative first and then your exhibit. So it might take you a little bit of time to sort of organize things in the appropriate arrangement for that. And then we request that you send it as one unified PDF. And you'll see at the bottom here, applications should be mailed directly to that pathways@doe.mass.edu. A question that has surfaced recurringly in the past is about the student demographics chart that needs to be completed. So I'm going to pass the mic to Jennifer for just a moment to share some information on that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure how many of you have had a chance to look at the Part B application. I included a link to it in the communications that you received about advancing to Part B. But we do ask, let's see, it's under equitable access. It's the second question. It says for the Part A submission, you're asked to complete a demographic chart that includes projected enrollment numbers by subpopulations. Please explain how you arrived at your projections. So we did in the past require a chart that was complicated. It raised a lot of questions. It was not, uniformly completed. So that question actually is actually highlighted on the versions on the website. So we did ask this year in Part A not to provide a chart, but to speak to the student populations that you would recruit. So I would say for the answer in Part A, to that second question under equitable access, explain how you arrived at essentially the narrative projections that you offered in Part A. So you're not going to have to reflect on a chart necessarily.
Excellent. Thank you.
Have I thoroughly confused everyone? I'm good at that.
Well, if you have lingering questions, we'll actually advance to the next slide. So that was a nice segue for us, Jennifer. Thank you. So
Sure.
We do have additional opportunities that we think might be helpful as you continue to move through Part B applications. So you can hang with us for another 90 seconds. We want to share those with you. So there are office hours that are going to be available on December 15th. I'll flag the link for you at the bottom. Again, it was just shared by a colleague in the chat to access information about all of these experiences. But December 15th is a great opportunity. That's sort of like a one-on-one experience where you can ask district-specific questions you have to Jennifer and Callie. So you get a little bit more individualized attention if you participate in office hours. On January 19th, there's a Designing for Equity workshop. That could be a beneficial space for, as Jennifer just noted, the student demographics question falls under thinking about equity criteria within the application process. So you might find that experience helpful as well. And then as always, the FAQ guide is a really important resource. It's a living document. So as we get questions, we add to it. So it's pretty robust. It represents a lot of questions that have surfaced, especially recurring questions within the community. So we'd point you there as a first resource for sort of on your own before you jump to us. You might find some of the answers that you seek in that document. So we'll share that link for the FAQ guide. With that said, we are at 3:02, so we try really hard to end right on time. So we apologize for going a couple of minutes over, taking a couple more minutes of your afternoon. If you would, the last request we'd have of you today, if you could pop over that survey link that Allison just shared in the chat. You don't have to complete it at this exact moment, but if you could pull it open to 10 to before the end of the day. For those of you who have been part of our Pathways community in the past, we've been very transparent about ways that responses to these surveys have impacted future planning. So we'd really appreciate to hear from you so that we can make sure all of these webinars, workshops, etc., are serving you the absolute best way that they can. So with that said, thank you so much to each of you for being here this afternoon. We hope this was helpful. We'll hang around for just a moment if you need to grab any of us for any quick items, but we wish you a smooth, relaxing rest of your afternoon. So thanks for being here.